Let's bring in Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Now, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for coming back on Squawk on the Street.
Thank you. Well, we had some exciting news this morning, so I wanted to be back with you.
Absolutely. Now, do you think with this, there's a possibility, if the doctors let us, that we could be open for business in the month of May?
I do, Jim. I think as soon as the president feels comfortable with the medical issues, we are making everything necessary that American companies and American workers can be open for business and that they have the liquidity that they need to operate their business in the interim.
Can a small business person right now, 10-person, say, 3-person, can they go to somebody and say, listen, we applied, and look, there's a little bit of backlog. Would you please give us a week? Is there a way to just have a kind of like a give us a week thing going? Because the small, medium-sized business, base of this country, we know the money's there for them. We know that there's no issues except for the fact that it's just an overwhelming number of loans.
Well, Jim, you're correct, and I want to thank the SBA and the Treasury and the banks that participated. It was remarkable. We got this up last Friday. Some of the big banks have done a wonderful job. Some have been a little bit slower. The community banks have done an extraordinary job. And I want to encourage all small business that if they don't get a loan today, there'll be money. And that's why we went to Congress. We asked Congress for another $250 billion to make sure every single small business has money. But I would say the big news for today is we've been working around the clock with the Federal Reserve. And these announcements, specifically now a new facility, the Main Street lending facility and the Muni facility, and upsizing the corporate bond facility, will create up to $2.3 trillion of liquidity.
The area that I'm now concerned about, because I think you've got this small, medium-sized business down, and I know you'll protect them and the community banks. Boeing, 1,700 companies report to Boeing. A lot of them are small, medium-sized businesses, whole states like Kansas. And we haven't heard a thing about what they're going to do, loans, loan guarantees, what you're going to do, the $17 billion in capital, and also all the airlines, if they're flying at 90%. That's the hole to me in the economy. As you protect small and medium-sized, don't we have to protect the industries that report into Boeing and the airlines?
Well, Jim, as you know, we've been working around the clock, SBA program, Fed facilities, airlines. We'll update the president this afternoon on where we are on our airline analysis. We hope to get to a lot of the airlines starting tomorrow and over the weekend with preliminary information. And it is our objective to make sure that I've said this is not a bailout, but that airlines have the liquidity to keep their workers in place. So that's the next big thing we'll be rolling out.
Mr. Secretary, I have Madam Speaker on tonight, Madam Speaker Pelosi, who is asking for even more money than what you're willing to, what you guys were, where you were. But the Fed is willing to give even more money than she wants. Can we take any sort of squabbling off the table, given the fact that Chairman Powell basically said, hey, listen, Madam Speaker, you're thinking too small?
Well, Jim, let me just differentiate, because the Fed facilities are lending facilities. So those are facilities where we are providing loans. Again, in the case of the SBA facility, it's lending against the PPP loans, so making sure that the banks have the liquidity. But those loans will be paid off as part of the fiscal program that we did in the $2 trillion deal. What we are asking the Senate and the House for is another $250 billion. That's for the loans that will turn into grants. So, again, I just want to be clear. The Fed programs are loans. The congressional programs give us the ability to actually put money into the economy and make grants, whether it's hospitals, whether it's reimbursing states for COVID expenses. And we need more money for small business. And the president has been very clear. He's happy to talk about other issues, such as hospitals in states, in the next bill. But we wanted to go and get money for the small business program, which, again, enormous bipartisan support. It's the same program we approved, just making sure that all small businesses have enough money.
Mr. Secretary, it's David Faber. Yesterday, I had asked you about how you were going to deal with those non-investment grade companies with more than 500 employees, and you'd indicated something was coming soon. I would assume that's what we're seeing this morning from the Fed. But there are still companies that are more than 10,000 employees that have more than $2.5 billion in revenues but are not investment grade. Do they benefit from this new move by the Fed as well, or is there still more to come?
Well, as I alluded to yesterday, we've been working around the clock with the Fed on the Main Street program, and you'll see there's two components to it. There's the ability for us to make, with the Fed, new loans. There's also the ability for banks to do expanded loans, so adding on to existing loans. So these facilities, will be flexible in meeting the needs of mid-market companies. And to the extent that there's companies that are greater than 10,000 and don't fit into the corporate facility, we'll have discussions with the Fed and take that into consideration. But I really want to thank the Fed. They've done an extraordinary job in rolling out all these new facilities and for all different types of asset classes, from Main Street to municipalities, states, and cities, now know that they will have liquidity. This is an unprecedented move.
It is, as we pointed out, even moving into the high-yield bond market, which in terms of some of the ETFs there, truly amazing. You are still relying on the banks here, though, Mr. Secretary. And, the PPP program, you pointed out some banks doing well, others maybe not as well. I'm hearing the banks are demanding more disclosure, perhaps, than SBA is asking for, because they're banks, and they just tend to do that. Are you concerned at all when it comes to this mainstream lending facility? You're using the banks there. Time is of the essence, that the banks are just going to ask for too much information as well?
I really don't. And again, I think we've created simplified, streamlined. And again, let me just remind everybody, we're in day 5 of the SBA program. This is day 5 of a brand new program, okay, where, again, community banks, mid-sized banks. I heard a story from someone in L.A. that their cleaners got money. They were a small business. They got money immediately. They were thanking us. There are a lot of small businesses out there that this has been a lifesaver. And, the banks have been overwhelmed. So the issue is they'll get to all these customers, and we want to make sure the customers know, whether they're charities, whether they're small businesses, if they didn't have accounts, the banks will get to all of them.
Mr. Secretary, it's Carl. Obviously, the news today is a lot to absorb. However, we did have Chair Yellen on our air earlier in the week, who said that in the long term, it, quote, wouldn't be a bad thing for Congress to consider allowing the Fed to expand its asset portfolio even further, maybe even stocks. Are there any discussions in trying to make that happen?
There's no discussions about that at the moment. Chair Powell and I are committed to make sure we use whatever authorities they have and whatever authorities we have. We've gone to Congress, as we said, for a very significant amount of money. We have over $450 billion that we can use to support these Fed programs. As you've said, the Fed has now rolled this out to new asset classes. So Chair Powell and I are doing everything together to use their authorities and our authorities, and we have great confidence that this will create enormous liquidity in the market for small businesses, medium-sized businesses, big businesses. This is all about keeping Americans working.
Well, Mr. Secretary, let's talk about that, because I think that there is, without a doubt, a level of cooperation between business and government that I've never seen. And I think that the businesses want very much, they're taking these pledges. Mark Benioff last night, 90-day pledge, no layoffs. How about we get together, we get these business people who have led us through this period. We get them together, they huddle, and they figure out how to open our country for business, because if we do that, we are going to save this year. And Mr. Secretary, if we're closed for 2 months, who knows what that's going to mean for our country?
Well, Jim, the president is made clear we're getting the best advice out there from small business, big business, everyone on how to reopen this economy. And I would just reemphasize, from what I hear, the medical professionals, there's new ideas every day. There's new treatments that are coming up. And, I know that at some point, we will have a vaccine. I don't know when it'll be, but I have great confidence in the medical professionals and the technology in the United States.
One last question. I think the community banks, they're on overdrive, and they're fabulous and really helping the 10, 15, 30. How's this Wells Fargo? I know the president had great skepticism about what they were up to, wasn't happy with how they ran the bank. All new team. They're back. They're not even going to take the profit here. Is Wells going to help us?
Jim, I want to be careful talking about any one bank in particular, given my role. But I would say we're following the situation with Wells. And again, we know the new management team. I've known them before. And we're pleased that they've expanded now their PPP program.